Hey, hello, folks. I'm so happy to have you all here with me today. My name is Emily Sherrio. I'm an admin here at Locally Optimistic. I'm excited to co-host this conversation with Tim Chen on why and how data leaders build versus buy and make that decision. So just a couple of friendly reminders. We would love it if you're in a place where you can turn on your camera, so this feels a little bit more like a conversation and less of a panel talking at you. Please do join. Body language is wonderful. So that's number one. Number two, we're going to be using the event-build-buy channel in Slack for conversation. So please try to engage there. There can be wonderful side conversations going on, and we'll be sure to excuse me, we'll be sure to kind of call those questions out loud as they come in. With that, I will briefly introduce myself and then I'm going to turn it over to Tim. So my name is Emily Sherrio. I was previously head of data at Netlify and the first data analyst at GitLab. Currently, I'm a data strategist in residence at Amplify Partners, which is an early stage VC firm. And I help multiple companies in their portfolio with their data teams. So, and data strategy more widely. So that's a bit about me. Tim, why don't you take it away?
Sounds good. So good to see everybody. I'm Tim. I started as a startup engineer, worked on data infrastructure from open source. So I worked on Spark, Kafka. I was early at Mesosphere, so I was kind of a vendor from that point of view. And then I also was a founder as well, selling into enterprises. So I had a little bit of that experience. And then now I'm also running a fund called Essence. We're back data companies as well. So yeah. Should we turn into our panelists?
Please, yeah,
okay.
Take it away.
Sounds good. Like, hey, as Chad, do you want to go out, take off as intro?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Hey, folks. My name is Chad Sanderson. I am the head of product for the data team at Convoy. Convoy is around a $3 billion startup it's a digital freight marketplace based in Seattle. Before this, I was on the experimentation and analytics team at Microsoft. And then I've sort of bounced around at doing data related things at companies like Sephora and Subway. And then I was on the SaaS platform side, working in Oracle's marketing cloud for a while. And I will turn it to Luca.
Hey, folks. Luca Gazzanti here. I'm a director of data science and heading up the experimentation platform team at Zulily.com. Zulily is a flash sale internet retailer. They also sponsor the Seattle Sounders soccer team. My background is actually in science, really. I've had multiple roles where analyzing data of all sorts has always been the key, from physical data, acoustic data, telecommunications data, and then, for the past 10 years or so of my career, more transactional data like e-commerce, buying, visits, click streams. And so data has always been with me. And so I'm super excited to be here to talk about it.
And Chuchen takes away.
Hello, this is Chuchen. I'm Chief Data Officer at Etsy, and we sell online handmade items. And if you ever buy a custom-made mask, it's likely to come to us. And before joining Etsy, I was leading voice recognition at Amazon Alexa. And then before that, I was always working in e-commerce space.
Thank you to our panelists. Chuchen, I can't see your video. Can anyone? No. Okay.
No. Yeah, I will fix that technical issue.
Computers, yes. Right? Well, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. Tim, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So I think we definitely want to start. The reason why we we even brought this talk together is Chad and I, we had a conversation. I guess the quick backstory is because we feel like a lot of head of datas, are having a really tough choice and also want to learn from each other's experience. So we kind of bring everybody together to learn from each other, like what were the decisions each one of you were making when it comes to what you decided to buy, when you decided to build, what are all the lessons you learned, and even some horror stories that came out of those. We're definitely very interested in those. So it's kind of where we started as an idea to get this going. And it's meant to be like a more of a free form chats. I know we can start up some questions, but maybe it will be easiest to actually just kick this off, because I think all three of you all have to made different decisions in the past, right? When it comes to like buying versus build. And so I probably want to start with Chad, but I think it's definitely maybe one place to just start, right? What are your, what are the kind of the things that you've made in the past, let's say that you bought or versus build? What was the last decision you had to make? Because we can start from there. Because I think what went through that decision-making process, and what were the tough challenges on the way? I think what we can start from a quick example, because I think that'll give us some even illumination of what the process been like internally is. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start with just a little bit of background on what my team does at Convoy and how we sort of operate and serve the greater business. I run a team called the Data Platform Team, and we are responsible for the end-to-end data technology stack. So that's everything from the change data capture layer, like as data flows in from our production databases and enters the data warehouse, to the instrumentation layer, to ETL tools like DBT, and then we also have a application layer, which is how are people, our internal customers, actually using this data to make business decisions. So that might be business intelligence tooling, experimentation platforms, machine learning platforms, sort of the whole shebang. So the perspective we try to take is, what is the best end-to-end arrangement of tools and platforms, and how do we glue them together to make our internal customers as efficient as possible? So as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of buy build decisions that we have to make in that end-to-end framework. The most recent of these is we are going through a events-driven architecture migration right now. So we're moving Convoy away from tools like Mixpanel from instrumentation and from like service level events, more towards like an entirely Kafka-driven system. And so we're thinking about what are some of the platforms that we can build to help facilitate that, things like event registries, things like SDKs for event definition and schema evolution. So we have to make a call on like, should we build this internally? Should we wait for the startup world to sort of catch up to us? Is there anything that we can apply to our current use cases? But the whole pipeline is we've had to make these types of decisions. We have an internal experimentation platform, so we had to make a buy build decision there. We have an internal ML deployment platform, so we actually migrated off of SageMaker to build our own thing in-house. We have a feature engineering platform that we decided to build. We also open source a lot of stuff, so we use open source DBT, we use open source Metabase, we use a data discovery tool called Amundsen, and then there's things that we pay for as well.
Got it. Hey, Luca, yeah, do you want to talk about your recent?
Yeah, so that resonates with me as specifically on the experimentation platform. We're kind of embedded in this ecosystem of data where we've had to essentially form a data platform team, which did not exist until a few years ago, where different teams had their own, tables and databases, and things didn't necessarily talk to each other. But with the experimentation as like a specific use case, there was this need for all these data streams to talk to each other. And so, first of all, establish that communication communication panels. Then right away, then there are data governance issues, right? Whereas each team kind of take care of its own data source. When you start having dependencies across the data sources, then you have to establish the data governance. It could be something as simple as like, SLAs, reliability, missing data for like 5 minutes. Is that bad or not bad? Like, so all these decisions, all of these requirements, I should say, kind of illuminated like the need for thinking more carefully about data by itself. In terms of building versus buy, so we are on a Google platform now for the most part. That's how Zulily, and Zulily has a hybrid cloud. Some of the components are served from AWS. So that's kind of the overall infrastructure, but then everything else is kind of a build, and that's kind of an inherited trait of the company. They very much favor the building. So I don't have a huge insight on the buying, except for on the experimentation side, and maybe we can talk more about that later on. On the platform side, I mean, there are a lot of experimentation platforms available, which is great, even compared to just a couple of years ago. Just a flourishing of services and companies that help with that. But what we found is that we really need, working from the customer backward. Our customer is mom, right? Mom who buys stuff on the internet at a good price. And working backwards, we need to have this overall kind of cohesive customer experience. It goes from what happens on the site, things like experimented with color and buttons and all that, the usual things, all the way connecting it to emails, which are both, marketing emails, engagement emails, social ads, right? Having this cohesive customer experience. I mean, when you're trying to orchestrate and experiment, right? You need to connect all those, and we found that we kind of needed to build our own experimentation platform, because the pain point is in the connection. It's not so much on like measuring, statistics in an A/B test kind of way. Because if we operated only on site, there are great products that you can just buy and that have feature flagging built in and all that. But connecting all the various data sources together and thinking of experimentation holistically from a customer experience perspective, that kind of drove us to building our own thing. Yeah.
How about you, Chuchen?
I'm reading the Slack and there are some interesting questions. So I like for a big, like for a public company, when we talk about build versus buy, there are usually three perspectives we talk about, right? One is we ask, do we need this now, or we can wait or not? If you cannot wait, there's no choice. You just need to buy, because there's time is always a key factor. And there are a few things that is easy choice that you have to buy. I see first is like you need something now. The second thing is that you need to buy time, like say maybe Google will release that, but Google take 2 years to release something for everyone. So there's a startup who can give you a pacifier solution. You just need to buy, because even you build, you will get replaced by Google or Amazon. Then there's no need to build that you can probably just buy. And the third thing is that just like I think no company will build a Slack themselves, right? And no team will build a TensorFlow themselves. Sometimes the building doesn't make sense at all when there's already a well-accepted solution that you can just introduce to your ecosystem. I think those are three easy choices, but there are definitely very hard choices, which I think kind of try to also answer the question is that many people thought that they built something better, and then that's why we buy something. No, like when you buy something for the reason to speed up, the reason you don't buy something good is there's always a cultural things that engineers love to build things, they don't love to use things. And there are also a stability, like every company has their own ecosystem and the way how they do things is a legacy. So introduce something to this ecosystem always create some kind of issues that you need to address. And the third thing is that the biggest worry about buying something is lack of ownership. Because when you run a company, when you run a team, you will say, tell me what is the KPI, what is the business impact you want to hit. But when you buy something, people will say, I will give you this tool. So what I care is that I'm going to enjoy my dinner in a restaurant, and I want to make sure I have a good experience. That's what I'm looking for. But oftentimes people say, I'm going to sell you the most fresh fish so you can cook it yourself. Or I'm going to give you the best utensil in the world. I got that, but that's not my point. What I want is just have a dinner. So giving me a lot of wonderful tool or material is not solving my problem. So I think that's more about, oftentimes when we talk about build and buy, it's on strategic level, is that are you looking for better utensil, or are you just want to get a dinner and then you move on?
Yeah, I think you already actually got into some of the next questions we definitely want to get into, which is like, how do you actually evaluate? Because even just those two answers, or three answers, there's already the nuances we hear, right? The mentality of the culture of the company, the way the company growth and KPIs align, and at what position, and all of that kind of comes into the picture. I guess I want to ask, like, what is a framework you use to evaluate, this is a problem I should go buy, or this is a problem I should build something? And when you do buy, how do you even evaluate that? What is the right solution for you to buy from? I know, do you have a framework in general, or is it domain specific? I'm just curious how you guys think about that problem at the moment.
I can tell the framework we use. So first, we ignore any vendor in the world. We created something called Scorecard. We just focus on kind of writing an OKR or KPI. Just forget about picking vendor or build it yourself. Just ignore, assuming you can do anything, and write down your criteria. Like say, I need to have a deep learning AI framework in next 3 months. You just write down how important this is to the company or to you. So you write down the questions, and then using Scorecard to give a score for each of them. And then using the Scorecard to decide like a vendor as well. Like, does this vendor give you the solution to fix your problem? So focus on problem, and then using Scorecard to move to a solution, and using Scorecard to make a decision.
You have a quick example what a scorecard might look like? Yeah.
So let's talk about maybe I'm using machine learning like auto ML or machine learning operation as example, right? So like for example, how important for you to have model observabilities, right? Do you need to, like say if I need to pick a vendor to do like a machine learning governance, so then we need to write down what is important. Like say I need to have a visibility on our GCP expense, or you basically write down all the things you like. If you have unlimited resource, you can build anything forever. Here's the important thing to you, and then you kind of write this as a row. Each row is basically your wish list, and then you evaluate that what to get you is that build or buy or co-development, which are third option, which I'm trying is that to partner with a startup that we license to each other, but we can keep customized one, and then so there are different options that you can pick, and this really depends on the problem you want to solve. So each row is kind of a feature request, and then each column is basically the score on the choice you make. Like what will you get?
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, because we have a pretty similar framework, and at Convoy we actually have sort of high-level company tenants. And when you weave these high-level company tenants into your evaluation process, it's much easier to get the company on board with whatever it is that you decide. And when these types of evaluations come around, there's 3 tenets that we try to follow pretty closely. The first one is to focus on problems instead of solutions. So that lines up pretty much one-to-one. The second is we need to innovate deliberately, and innovate deliberately means that if we're going to be applying engineering headcount to solve a problem, it needs to be solving a problem that we can't get by spending money somewhere else. It's really easy to spend money. It's much harder to think about like strategy and product and things like that. And then the third is you need to really dive deep into the area that you're focusing on. One of the issues that I've seen, a common problem is engineers really love building stuff, and they have a lot of great ideas, But sometimes the ideas that an engineer might have are somewhat disconnected from the problem that your data customer actually faces. And in some cases, the solution or even the requirements that the data customer has is not actually aligned with what the company needs. Those might be different things. And I'll give you an example of this. We had a problem about a year ago where a lot of data scientists, we actually moved from a distributed data engineering model where you had data engineers embedded in product pods to a centralized data engineering model where they supported platforms and they operated a lot like a service team, and people would make requests to build pipelines and things like that. And that created a lot of churn on these product teams because they were actually using these data engineers to do, I call it SQL monkey work. There might be people who are familiar with those concepts, but it's fixing tables and going back behind data scientists and sort of optimizing queries and things like that. And that actually became a gap that we had. And we realized there was a hiring gap and a skills gap where our data scientists actually didn't know a lot about, they weren't super familiar with data architecture. And one of their big asks was, we need to hire another 30 or 40 data engineers so that we can go back to the old model and embed them in every single pod. So that's a big problem, and that's an ask. And instead of just taking that at the surface value and saying, okay, we should do that because people are asking for it, we really wanted to understand, well, why is it that your average data scientist can't take ownership over code quality themselves? What is preventing that from happening, that they need a data engineer? What is creating this very, very messy data warehouse that's causing all these problems and causing them to take 1 million hours to write very basic SQL queries? And once you have an understanding of why that's happening, then you can sort of work backwards and say, okay, what are the solutions now that we need to address all these problems in a holistic way, in an end-to-end way? And not just, oh, well, there's a piece here and a piece here and a piece here, and we just kind of stitch them all together. So we did that process. That's how we actually decided to move to this events-driven architecture, which I can always talk about in more detail, but we followed that exact same pattern for everything: experimentation, machine learning, pretty much everything. So that's one thing that I wanted to quickly mention. And then on the evaluation side, how we actually go about doing evaluation sort of tactically, I have around five separate steps that I use. The first step is to make sure you really deeply understand the problem. And that's, communication with ICs, talking to managers, because they usually have a good idea of how this is impacting multiple teams, understanding the cross-organizational impact, and then being sure to tie this to a direct business problem. And usually that business problem is at the leadership level. So instead of just saying, data scientists or some data consumer is struggling with X dashboard or X report, oftentimes those things don't get a lot of traction to build stuff internally unless you can tie that to some business issue.
Yeah, it was just I have all but 2 people have given me
Hey,
their
Beth Ann,
sign-in,
you're
so
off
I was
mute.
just typing up.
Hey, Beth Ann, you're off mute.
Yes. Okay, cool.
Thanks, Chad.
No problem. So yeah, tying that to some business outcome. So an example of that might be, we have a new business division that we're spinning up at Convoy, and we want to grow that business by 300% this year. And right now, we don't have a good staging environment. We don't have a separate staging environment. We're using a demo environment for using it as a staging environment. And that means that our salespeople have to get an engineer on the call every single time they walk through a demo with a big customer. And that is a blocking issue to scale. And that's how we can now tie this back to maybe a need to spin up something like dynamic environments. So that's sort of the first major step. The second major step is to understand how other people in our space have solved this. Infrastructure and data in particular is something that every company has to deal with on some level or another. And so you shouldn't be thinking about redefining the wheel yourself every single time. We go out and talk to at least 20 or 30 teams every time we go through an evaluation, just so we can get an idea of are people buying stuff? Are they building stuff internally? And what's the gap there? The third thing is we create a rubric, and that rubric is divided into 2 parts, which is the characteristics of the product that we care about. The latency has to be this. they have to have like this level of support model. This is the risk level that we're comfortable with. This is the speed that we need to get this solution time for. And then there's a feature list, and those are the two separate things. Then you actually need to go and take a look at the SaaS landscape and go through the POCs and demos and things like that. And then finally, you bring along some people inside your company, and you actually make some decision. So that's how we go through our process.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Luca, I guess you're a very different mindset here, right? There's much
Yeah.
more building than buying. So tell us, like,
It's,
what is that, your evaluation criteria, even though you're probably not buying as much at all, right?
That's right. However, the things that Chad said, in particular, they very much resonate, because that's how we approach like figuring out what it is that we really need. What are the real pain points? So here's I want to give you a story that's probably similar to what Chad has experienced. Is on the experimentation side, it used to be that it took a week, let's say, to turn on 2 or 3 readouts. Why was that? Because there was a data scientist who was on rotation who answered JIRA tickets. Hey, can you do this for me? Hey, here's the table, you got to do it. You got to look up. And they would just manually create all these SQL queries just for the privilege of having a few charts that show, lift or don't show lift, right? So, and why is that? Well, that's just the way it was. So then we started saying, okay, this is not sustainable, right? Our core product team, our core website team cannot experiment fast enough this way. We cannot test various email strategies this way. And so, working backwards from the requirement is that fast experimentation, right? Fail fast, learn quickly about your customer. Then we figured out that there was a pain point. So we started building the automation, templatizing all this stuff, having structure around the experiments. And then we figured out, wait a minute, we don't have the proper infrastructure. We also didn't have a staged environment. I mean, imagine doing everything off of master. And if you touch something, you can break something else over here. So we had to enable that. So it's the same process. It's the same process, but we kind of had this build it yourself kind of already decision already made, right? And I think it's probably appropriate for now. And again, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, is the pain point to me is the integration with various data sources that are like, this is where it's your company's lifeblood, right? And so, in fact, actually, maybe I can turn this around and more as of a question. In evaluating the build versus buy, is there a specific way, or how do we look at the integration costs, not just the cost of buying the thing, but also the cost of integrating it? Because it's the sum total of that makes it worth, right? And then the benefit that you get out of that after that is done. And so I'm wondering if other people have had any thoughts about what it takes after. Okay, you bought a new thing, now you got to propagate it throughout the company, make it work, do the change management and all that. So.
Yes, I think, Luca, you mentioned something which I want to pile on a little bit. It's not just integration. There will be operation cost, right? People, when they when they're using a third-party tools or service, they usually reach out to some internal people to support, not the external people, because they just sell a service. You need to also arrange the support, like a Slack or 800 number or email. And so that is another operation cost. And usually the SLA is like 4 hour, 8 hour, but most engineers don't like that. They want someone they can Slack immediately and get the problem solved. And the third thing, I call it the divorce cost, which is very, very expensive, is that because it's a natural conflict of interest when people, as a vendor, as a SaaS company, they want to deeply root into your ecosystem. I think I understand that. But for most of the company, they do need to reserve this right to part away. Either you get an investment from my competitors, Like if you get an investment from Amazon, maybe Google cannot use in your service, for example, right? So there's a necessary, also if you are a startup, no offense, 90% fail, they never go public, right? What if you fail? So there's a part of way or divorce, like a prenup, we need to sign before. So the cost is integration, operation, and divorce. So it's not just paying you monthly fee. Monthly fee is not the concern, it's the divorce that is the concern. So if you can bring up a proposal that you really take care of the divorce and take care of operation, oh my God, like I would love to hear like those proposals. But remember, divorce is actually against your best of your interest, because when you sell something to your customer, you don't help. Who marries someone with the goal to divorce, right? So that's basically the conflict of interest problem.
One of the things that we do there, Chuchen, is like, and it is that if we've identified a gap in our platforms that we could potentially outsource to a vendor, we'll usually, but in most cases where our Convoy is ahead enough of the curve where a lot of the platforms that we would need that we don't already have would be very early stage startups. And so oftentimes what we do is we build out some MVP, like spin up a service, validate that like this is a real problem and that like the way that we're thinking about it is an actual solution. And then if we actually decide to onboard some like pre-seed or seed or like Series A company and you know they go bust or whatever, then we can always roll it back to the old thing. And we know that that works and like and that solves the problem. And then we can migrate to a new company, or we can just decide like screw it, this is too risky to outsource to anyone else, and we can build it internally. So that's one of the ways that I think about it. I actually had another question based on what Luca said to both of you, which was when you're thinking about so there is this like there's the actual like purchase cost, but then there's also the onboarding cost. And how do you think about how do you think about presenting those costs to a leadership team and saying, you know, we need to either make this investment, whether it's a financial investment or it's like a headcount investment, and prioritizing that against teams that are maybe having more direct financial impacts with what they prioritize. Like this team wants to hire 5 people to build some new machine learning model, and we think that that's going to deliver us like $20 million over the next, you know, 2.5 years, versus we want to spend time upgrading Airflow, or we want to spend time like building out an internal analytics platform. Like how do you get teams to leadership to balance those two things?
Well, it's the eternal problem. I mean, there's an indirect assignment of value there, like where you can say in some cases, you know, business leaders, you know, it's easier for them to point at something and say, okay, if I do this for a year, I will get X, you know, the following year, or I will start getting this. The enablement, the infrastructure stuff is, it's hard to connect it to like downstream business metrics directly. And so I think you have to kind of step, it's almost like walking a funnel, right, of attribution. It's the same, well, I have, you know, I build up the infrastructure, I will save, let's say, 2 data engineering open heads, which I can, you know, instead of hiring them, I can redeploy them to like another problem, another pain point. I can move them around. So in the end, I mean, honestly, in the end, it is money, but you have to, I think you have to show how that money kind of shifts in the columns, right, in the balance sheet. And you got to have the whole picture there, like all the costs and all the benefits. One challenge with that is that sometimes the benefits, you know, they're a little bit further down the road in terms of time. And so maybe there's an effort to make there in convincing people to kind of give that much runway, right, if needed. The flip side, though, to be fair to everybody, is that are there ways to sort of realize that benefit, at least part of it, by milestones, so you can continuously show the progress towards the big goal. that way. So that's how I approach it.
Yes, I can share my thoughts, but I also want to close the conversation that the previous one is. I think a good vendor see themselves as selling a command line in Linux, not selling a G Suite or Microsoft Office to a company. Because if you sell one solution and you kind of your solution is so good, but it's just very clear what the problem you solve. I think it's easier for people to use your service, and divorce course will be smaller. And to respond to Chet's question, I think there are two things that I learned in my career. The first thing is that we are all in the business of trust. So it's your job to earn trust and then play your trust card with your manager or CEO, like say, hey, you need to trust me. I'm the expert in the room. Like the reason you hire me is because you want me to solve the problem, not for me to explain to you like how enablement or revenue. I mean, this is my problem, not yours. So what I'm framing myself is I'm a general contractor, and my CEO is actually the homeowner who hired me to do the job for him, right? So I don't come to my CEO and say, I need an electrician, I need someone to do the window. I mean, he don't care. He say, here's the designer, your product team give you a design of your dream house, and I give him how much I need, like basically my estimation, how much cost to build the house, we agree. And make sure I deliver it on time so we can move in on time. I think I see myself as a general contractor. And one of the things is, first, I need to build the trust, like a regular update to the people who hire me to make sure they trust me will deliver on time, and I will stay within the budget. But I won't go into the detail, like this is enablement, this is infrastructure, this is overheads, or this is KTLO. I try to avoid those conversations. Sometimes I have to talk about that, but I try to avoid when I'm talking to people with higher rank than me. They don't care. That's why they hire me. So I think the two things, one is build the trust. The second thing is that try to combine sale, and remember your job is to get the problem solved. So I will sell the whole value when these things are all done, but I won't go into detail how much I spend on play the phone, engineering, contracting. I think that's why they hire us to do the job. And if your manager wants you to tell everything and you feel uncomfortable, then maybe it's the time for sharpening your interview skill and then move on, because it's more about value doesn't align.
Yeah, I say that in a slightly different way, Chuchen, where I remind folks, like, you're the expert in the room, lean into that expertise. Like, that's what people have you in the room for. So I want to transition a little bit. We've got a couple of really wonderful questions in the chat. David, I saw you here earlier. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, so it was around where open source sits in build versus buy, and I think someone answered already and said right in the middle. But I think that can shift depending on your involvement with it, like depending on how much you contribute and how involved you are with that particular open source technology. But yeah, it's interesting to see what other people think too.
Yeah, I was actually the one that said that, and the reason that I say right in the middle is because most of the time, one of the big reasons for investing in open source over building your own solution is you're reusing stuff that people have already worked on, but you usually have some plan to make contributions back at some point. Sometimes this can be for reasons that I don't particularly always agree with. It might just be like, hey, we want to sort of, we use this tool, we want to write a nice article about it, and maybe there's some value in doing that. I do think that a lot of people underestimate the cost of investing in an open source solution. I've seen this a few times in my career where it actually would have been much easier to just build the thing internally, because there's so much deep, complex integration that you have with your like very particular tech stack that you have to fork it early on. And then once you fork it, like the community starts going in another direction, and the cost to actually upgrade it to like catch up to the current version of the thing is greater than if you had just decided to build the thing yourself. So I think there has to be some like very strong, like a really good strategic view on if we're going to bring in this open source technology, what is like the 2 to 3 year plan on this? Like, is there going to be an intention to fork it early? And if so, what's the plan to sort of get back? If we're not going to fork it early, what's going to happen if we do run into something where our needs are not covered? Are we just going to accept that as like a loss? We're not going to be able to do that thing, or like what's our plan going to be there? And one potential solution is most of these open source tools these days are usually done as like a third party, like a SaaS play. You move up to like the hosted version, and then you get all this great stuff for free, and maybe you get a whole bunch of extra features. So maybe you take that into consideration as well. That's generally how we think about it. This is a section when we're doing our evaluations that we call risk. And one of the risks is always you encounter, sort of black swan-y type things where it's like, oh, this turns out to be something we had no idea was not going to be an integration point, or it was on the roadmap and now it's not, and now that's going to cause issues.
Cool. So Will, I think you have a question in the Slack, right? Do you want to unmute yourself, ask the question to the panel, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just wanted to hear from your guys' experiences, like what the #1 mistake that teams and companies make after they've actually introduced a new tool to the organization. And why is it not doing ROI analysis on that tool?
I'm wondering if I would say that most of the mistakes are done before. So in other words, you may observe the negative consequences of those mistakes after you brought it in. But I would say it's usually having missed, some requirement, not having done, ROI well enough, to a level of detail that's enough before, right? So I would say most of the mistakes actually occur before. You just pay the price after you bring it in. If I were to point to something that, mistake that's made after is maybe not investing enough time and energy in onboarding and change management, it tends to be underestimated. But again, that underestimation usually happens before when you're considering the tool. So.
I can also try that. I almost made a little mistake, but someone made a mistake right before me, so I learned from their mistake. So it's much cheaper. Is they try to be top down on this decision, not bottom up. So I saw an executive who kind of listened to a great pitch, do a pilot, everything looked awesome, sign a contract, but no one in his team is going to use that. Everyone just don't use that. So you want to pay, your problem, but we are not going to use that. I'm going to still solve the problem the way I want. So you can imagine, which is probably not the case, is that you buy a tool, you pay for the money, but none of the engineers want to use that. I think that's kind of and the reason for that is the selection process is top down, not bottom up. So the way I fix that is, unless there's at least a line manager who strongly advocate for a vendor or a tool, I'm not going to try to convince them to use whatever I feel is good for them. So I think as a human, there's a tendency, if they are part of the decision process, they are more likely to use whatever they agree to use. If they feel, even you give them the best selection based on your experience and you make every right decision, but when people, they don't feel they are in the process, they don't feel the process being fair, or their voice is not heard, culture-wise or emotional-wise, engineer will tend to push it back and just decide to leave it there and rot. And I think that's the worst nightmare I ever see in my career with respect to build versus buy when you're introducing something new to the organization.
One of the things that I've seen people make a lot of mistakes is not having a clear understanding of whether they're implementing a tool for enablement or enforcement. And enablement is, there's some problem that exists at the IC level and we need a solution for that problem. Enforcement is there's some problem that exists at the organizational level, and we need a heavy hand to come in and say, everybody has to do this. There's no debating it. Security is an example of something like that. Like, and so oftentimes what happens is people might either buy solutions and build solutions and not have a clear idea either way of which way they're supposed to go. So they may say, hey, we've built something and now we're going to put out a mandate so that everybody has to use it. But then sort of like Chuchen was saying, there might be teams where that use case doesn't particularly fit with what they're trying to do. And they're going to push back really, really hard, maybe because you don't have features that are sort of covering that use case, or maybe because it just doesn't make sense to them. Or you can go the other way and you have something that really everybody should be using, you kind of leave it up to them. So I've seen that's definitely been a problem that I've observed. The other thing is that sort of not thinking about the ongoing strategy and doing continued evaluations after you get the product. I think this is a really big issue for internal product development. Like, we'll sort of build something and now you have this internal thing, and maybe you're gathering requirements and you're building out new features, but you never stop to say, maybe there's something out there that's probably better than what we have internally. There's like a huge sunk cost fallacy where now we've got, 5, 10, 20 engineers working on something, and we're just thinking about iterating and not thinking so much about a continuum shift of maybe completely replacing what we've already built. And people get very attached to the stuff that they've been working on for years and years and years. So that's another one. And then the last thing I'll say on ROI analysis, I think ROI analysis is really, really hard. Luca kind of alluded to this before, where because we're so upstream of what the business traditionally thinks about as ROI, which is, like money or efficiency or, cost savings or something like that, it's actually really hard to do that analysis. And the other challenge is that we don't have a counterfactual. So I actually made this point recently when it came to experimentation platforms. One way that you might think about evaluating the ROI of an experimentation platform is by saying, we rolled out some feature, that feature turned out to be losing the company money. We were able to catch that and roll it back in 2 weeks. And, in this counterfactual world where we didn't have an experimentation platform, maybe that feature would have cost us $100,000 or $1 million a year. And so we can attribute that to the ROI of the tool. But then that raises the question of, well, maybe this feature was a little inherently risky. And it's because we have an experimentation tool that we can catch these things that we rolled this thing out, that we did this experiment to begin with. And so it gets really messy when you start thinking about, like, what would the world have been if we didn't have these things? So the way I like to think about like North Stars and analysis and stuff like that is really divided into 2 categories. There's do we have a gap? Like when we're looking at the end-to-end workflow for our customers, is there some gap where people are doing this in a really manual way? And there has to be some agreement that we think self-service and automation and reducing manual work is good, and filling that gap is a positive thing. And then the other side is onboarding, as Luca mentioned, meaning when people do have a use case that it's relevant for them to use the tool, are they using the tool? Are they thinking about it when they're when they're building things, when they're going through analysis and stuff like that? So coming up with some way to see how frequently that's happening is usually an indication if we've created the right stuff. So I try to avoid like the money conversation and tie it more back to like, are we filling gaps, and then are people using it?
Yeah, I did not mean ROI in terms of money, more so like, are we getting adoption? Is this tool living up to its expectations? But thank you for clarifying that and all of your comments.
Thanks, Will, for the great question. We are butting up on time here, and anyone who has been on a call with me will tell you that I start and end on time. So before we wrap up for the day, let's go through our panelists, tell people where they can find you. Let's start with Chad.
So you can find me, LinkedIn is probably the best place to get in contact. You just search for me, it's Chad Sanderson, or if you want to go straight to the URL, it's just Chad Sanderson. And if you want to reach out to my email, it's chad.sanderson@convoy.com.
Luca?
Hi, same here. LinkedIn is the best way. my handle is Luca Casanti, so my first name and last name all together. And my email is lcasanti@zulily.com. So reach out, happy to chat.
And Chuchen.
Yeah, I think I should be able, like my name is unique, so there's only one Chuchen share in LinkedIn, so you can miss me. And I think I recommend LinkedIn, not email, because if you never email me before, by default, Gmail will send you to not important, right? So I probably will never respond to you. So send me a LinkedIn and connect, and just mention that you find through this channel, and I will always accept that. Yeah.
And Tim.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, TNHN or essence.dev, either way on the website.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists for being here today. Please continue the conversation in chat. Like build versus buy is a big thing. And we now have kind of more data points as we think about how to make our decisions, but Will laid out an awesome scorecard or framework that he thinks about. I'd love to see that continue to grow. Please do continue the conversation in Slack, and you can follow Locally Optimistic on Twitter, where we hope to see more of these conversations happen. We will post this recording on YouTube. Thanks everyone for spending a little bit of your Wednesday with us. Have a great Wednesday and a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.